And then we admit everyone else. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Good to see all of you. Good to see all of you. All right, so I'm just going to give it just a few minutes as we kind of come to a little quorum here with other attendees. But if I have not met you, if you haven't seen my face before, my name's Brittany. I'm the director of the Educational Advising Program, so it's really nice to meet you. I have with me here today two of my colleagues, Dr. Gail Siebold and Dr. Natasha Hill, who are both on the pre-med team as well. So if you do have questions throughout the presentation, I do encourage you to use the Q&A function, and we will try to answer those questions throughout the presentation. And I will break every once in a while to ask to see if there are specific questions that we want to address for the entire group. So, okay, so I do have a fair number of slides to get through. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So again, make use of the Q&A. If you do have questions, and I'll try to stop periodically through to answer some as well. All right, so do my slides still look good? Can't see my slides?
Right now we can't see them.
Okay, let me try it again. Can you see them now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, cool. So, so today we're here to talk about preparing for the MCAT, study tips, test taking strategies. And this is part one of our series. We will have part two, which is specifically going to be on the CARS, the critical analysis and reasoning section. Dr. Siebold will be giving that presentation soon. I think next week that presentation will happen. But all right, let's go ahead and get into it. So for this presentation, I think it's important for me to start kind of with the bottom line when it comes to taking the MCAT and what this actually means when we think about the full picture of a medical school application. So here's the bottom line. The bottom line is that the MCAT is one piece of your application. It's an important piece, of course, but I always recommend trainees and students not to overvalue it, right? There are other portions of your application that are just as important, including your GPA, the experiences you're going to talk about on your application, the quality of your statements, the quality of the written portion of your application. And of course, the school selection, which takes time to put together a really thoughtful school list. So if you're interested in hearing more about some of those other pieces that make a really balanced application, I strongly recommend that you watch the Choosing and Applying to Medical School webinar that we just did. Yes, you will get the slides and the recording for this presentation, so you will have it. But if you click on that link, it will take you to Choosing and Applying to Medical School, the recording. And you do need to log in with your NIH credentials. So when it comes to studying for the MCAT, again, the bottom line is to think of this as a part-time job and to make a schedule and try your best to stick with it. Use a variety of resources, and we're going to talk about different resources all throughout this presentation, and make sure to set realistic goals when it comes to your performance on this exam. So like I mentioned, this is the first part of a two-part series where we're going to be talking about the MCAT. So today it's mainly study tips and test taking strategies. And the second part on September 19th is going to be specifically about the CARS section, which is, as I'm sure most of you know, probably the most different section of the exam to study and prepare for. So if you click that link, it'll take you directly to the page to register. Okay, so this is what we're going to be talking about today, just a general outline. So we're going to start off with finding out everything you can about the exam. And there has been some changes around MCAT registration for this testing year that I will talk about that just came out within the last maybe week or so. We're going to talk about how to figure out where you stand, how much do you know, free and low-cost resources that hopefully you're going to be able to utilize, creating a study plan, actually studying and practicing, and then, of course, committing to full-length practice exams as well. So starting off with finding out everything that you can about the MCAT, I think it is really important to understand the policies of this exam and the different test sections of this exam. So when we're talking about the policies, the first thing that I recommend each one of you do is to download and read the MCAT Essentials, which is on the AAMC website. It includes all of the policies around the MCAT, including testing deadlines, when you can get a refund. Let's say you decide that you want to push back your exam, and how much money will you get refunded from your registration. Testing with accommodations. If you need accommodations, how do you go about procuring those? Rescheduling, voiding exams, checking in policies at the testing facilities, etc. So please make sure one of the first things you do as you get started studying for the MCAT is to download and read the MCAT Essentials. Also, I think it's good practice to follow the AAMC on their social media channels. They have a X account, they have a Facebook account as well. So make sure to follow the AAMC on your social media channels. They do a lot of updates directly through those channels. And just know that while previous attempts on the MCAT are visible on the score, on your AMCAS, if you void or you do a no-show, those do not show up on your MCAT, on your AMCAS. However, if you do void or do a no-show on your exam, they don't show up on your AMCAS, but they do count towards the number of lifetime attempts that you have to take this exam, which is 7. You have 7 lifetime exams to take this exam. So if you void or do a no-show, it's not on your AMCAS, but it does count towards that 7 that you get for the total lifetime of taking the MCAT. So now I'm going to talk about some of the changes that have recently occurred to the MCAT registration. So if any of you have registered for the MCAT before, you probably remember last year there was quite a bit of confusion around registering for the MCAT. People were in the waiting room for many hours trying to get registered. Many people will double, triple charge for the exam. So the AAMC recognized that happened last year and has put into place some new policies that are hopefully going to help mitigate that for this testing year. So the first thing that has changed for this testing year, 2026, is that registration for all of the MCAT dates is going to open on October 21st. So from January to September, all of the dates are going to open. Previously, they only used to open January to July and then October to September at a later date. But this year, everything will be open on October 21st. Also, notice the time change here. Last year, registration took place at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This year, it'll take place at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So please make sure you make note of that time change if this is your, especially if this is your second time registering for the exam. Again, follow the AAMC on their social media channels, but you can also register on their website to get updates as well. And they also have a video with a guide for registering for the MCAT that they do update every single testing year, and I have the link for that here. So again, another change this year. Registration, the date you register is going to be based on where the testing center is. So for those of you who are going to be registering for a testing center on the East Coast, so any of the states here in purple, right? So if you're in the Bethesda, DC, DMV area, this is going to be you. Your testing, the registration for these testing sites will open on October 21st at noon. For anyone who is registering for the MCAT in any of these kind of teal states, the Midwest to the West Coast, registration for those testing sites opens on October 22nd at noon. And then for anyone testing at international locations in Puerto Rico or any U.S. territories outside of the main continental U.S., Alaska, or Hawaii, those testing sites will open up on October 23rd. So again, this is a change. Remember that for this year, the day registration open is based on the testing location, not where you are currently located. Also, I do want to make one last note here is that by popular demand, it's a little tough to see, so I apologize about that. But by popular demand, the AMC did add one February date this year. In past years, there had never been February dates, but this year they did add one. Unfortunately, it is on Friday the 13th, so take that as you will. But there will be one February date open this year by popular demand. So as you gear up to register for the MCAT, the very first thing or second thing, I guess I should say, you all do after reading the MCAT Essentials is to go ahead and log into the registration website, and you can fill out those first 5 tabs before registration day on October 21st. And that system will open up October 1st. Highly recommend that you do this, because if you wait until, an hour or so before registration opens and there's any sort of issues with the website, that can impact how long or your place in the waiting room. So this is something that you all need to do starting October 1st. Do not wait until October 20th or October 21st to go ahead and start getting some of this information into the system. And then, as I mentioned last year, there were a number of technical issues with the waiting room and registration last year. This year, the AMC said during their most recent advisor webinar is that registrants can expect to be in the waiting room for about 2 to 3 hours before they're able to register. So if you're in the waiting room for an extended period of time, it's not you, I promise. That's just how they have chosen to extend the amount of time in the waiting room to kind of mitigate some of those technical issues. And then lastly, you should be on the website 10 minutes before registration opens at noon Eastern Standard Time. So that's going to be 11:50 Eastern Standard Time. So you can get randomly assigned a place in line. And there is no advantage to being on the website earlier than 11:50 a.m. But definitely by 11:50, you want to be on the website. And there is a video that you can watch on how the waiting room operates. So this is just some information on the fee assistance program. I recommend everybody look into the fee assistance program just in case you're eligible. In total, it reduces the cost of applying to medical school by about $2,000 total. You do have to include your parents or guardians' information if you are under the age of 26, but I think it's a good idea to just see if you're eligible, because if you are, you do get a reduced fee that you have to pay to register for the MCAT. Okay, so now that we've talked about, the differences that are going to be taking place this year for registration policies, now let's move into talking about finding out everything you can about this exam. So here's just a general overview of what you're in for when it comes for the MCAT. So the MCAT is a standardized exam. It's about 7.5 hours total if you include the breaks and you take the survey at the end of the exam. Those breaks are optional, but most examinees do take them. So this is what you're looking at. There are 4 different sections to the exam. Each one has 53 to 59 questions, and the amount of time that you get per question is here. And this isn't like the SAT, right? The MCAT is an exam where you do not get penalized if you put in the wrong answer, right? So that is one, I think, kind of good thing about the MCAT is that you are not penalized about putting in the wrong answer or just guessing. So the scores on the MCAT range from 118 to 132 for a total score between 472 and a 528. You do also get a percentile rate. A percentile rank as well. And you also get a confidence interval. This confidence interval is usually 2 to 3 points. And the purpose of this confidence interval is I know a lot of examinees kind of ignore it, but it's basically to give you a gauge of where your true MCAT score lies. So for example, if you score a 509 on the MCAT, and if you consider the confidence interval of 2 to 3 points, that's basically saying that a 509 isn't really that different of a score from a 511. So schools do take this confidence intervals into consideration, especially if you've retaken the exam. They are looking at that confidence interval to see on your second attempt, did you score outside of that confidence interval, right? To have a statistically significant different score. So just keep in mind that confidence interval when you're evaluating your results. And then in general, scores are released 30 to 35 days after the exam. They are automatically posted on your AMCAS. You do not have to do anything. And this is what you will see when you get your score back, broken down to each of the 4 sections on the exam, your score, the confidence interval, and then of course your percentile rank. So now we're going to move on to talking about what score do you need, right? And this is a really tough question for us as advisors to answer because this is going to be so dependent from person to person, the rest of the application, and the schools that you are applying to, right? So for example, just average data, most for matriculants, so students that have started into medical school, this ranges from 127 to 128 on each section for a total score of around 512. Ideally, your scores for each section are within 1 to 2 points of each other. And like I said, this is going to vary wildly depending on what schools you're applying to. So for example, at Johns Hopkins up in Baltimore, not too far away from us in DC, for them, the 10th percentile is a 517. For Harvard, the 10th percentile is also a 517. But for University of Maryland in Baltimore, the 50th percentile is a 515, right? So what score do you actually need is really subjective and dependent on a lot of different factors. Right. And one way to kind of find out this information is you can look into MSAR. It's $28 for 1 year, $36 for 2. And you can see the information about MCAT scores, GPA, all those things, in-state, out-of-state for all the medical schools, including Texas and the United States and Canada. And sometimes this information is also available for free on the school's website. So I'm always a proponent of looking on the school's website first to see if the information is there for free. And then if you can't find it, at some point you'll get MSAR and you can look at it there. So the bottom line with the scores is that it's important once you get your score back to be realistic and practical when you are selecting your schools using the MCAT as one metric. If you watched Choosing and Applying to Medical School that we did last week, you would know that I talked about many different metrics for selecting your schools, and the MCAT is one of them, right? So it is one metric that you're going to use to help select the schools that you're going to apply to. Okay, so when do you actually register for a test date, right? Again, registration will open on October 21st at noon. Ideally, you're going to register for the MCAT after you have taken your first practice exam. So for those of you who want to take the MCAT sometime between January to May next year, hopefully you have already done a practice exam. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. And you want to see how you're doing on a practice exam, ideally before you register for the exam. So when we talk about when's the ideal time to take the exam, again, ideal time is typically between January to April of the year you are going to apply. And this is because it allows time for retake if you have to. And like I said, there will be one February date this year that they added to the testing calendar. May or June is not ideal for your first time for taking the exam, but it is a good time if you are retaking the exam because you can already submit with the score that you have from maybe an exam you took from January to April, get your application verified, and then the new score will replace it once those results come in. So May and June is ideal for retaking the exam. The end of July to August is starting to get a little risky, a little late, especially if that's still within the same year you're going to apply. If you take it in July, August, or September for the next year, for the next testing year, or the next application cycle, I should say, that's fine. It's just if you're taking it between January and September in the same year you're applying, it does get a little late in the process. And then each school has a earliest and latest testing date that they will accept. All of this information is available on MSAR, but there's also a really nice PDF as well. If you click on this link, it'll take you directly to the earliest and latest date for the MCAT that school will accept. So moving on to, again, figuring out where you stand, right? How much do you know? And I already mentioned before that ideally before you register for the MCAT, you already have a decent idea of where you stand with how much you know for this exam. Again, whether you're going to do a practice exam or several practice sections, you really need to know how you are doing in a practice assessment so you can get an idea of what do you actually need to study. And this is going to change greatly from person to person. It's going to depend on how long you've been out of school. It's going to depend on what subjects do you feel like you've already had a really good grasp of versus subjects that you may need additional time studying on. This is going to greatly vary from person to person. And each section of the exam takes a different type of knowledge and type of preparation. So the MCAT is not an exam where you're just going to be memorizing facts or equations, especially for those of you, this is your first time you're going to be taking it. The point is for you to be able to know those facts and equations, right? And be able to apply them to different passages and analyze those passages to get the correct answer. So with this in mind, knowing that this exam is not just about memorizing facts and equations, you really need to invest your time wisely here, especially if you are working full-time as a postbac at NIH, where you're working 40 hours a week. You really need to invest your time wisely here. And realize that doing tons and tons of content review eventually is going to have diminishing returns and dividends as you continue to study. So how do you figure out where you start, where you're at? What level are you beginning at? You can start this process with timed or untimed practice sections. And for some people, that's even going to include like a practice exam. Like maybe you do a half-length diagnostic exam through a third-party resource like Blueprint, right? This way, you know where you are starting. And then from there, you kind of go through this process of analyzing and assessing your results, reviewing content and strategy, and then again, you come back to practice questions. And we're going to talk about this cycle several times throughout this presentation. So the first place that you want to start when it comes to gathering resources for the MCAT is going to be the MCAT Prep Hub. Again, this is the official resources from the AAMC, and I want to make it clear that the AAMC resources are the most similar to what you're going to see on the real exam. So the resources that are available for free in the MCAT Prep Hub, they're the study guide, they're the content outline. I'll talk a little bit about that later. There's practice questions. There's 2 practice exams. One is unscored, and then one is scored with the percentile. There's Khan Academy guides. There's a lot more available in the free resources from the AAMC through the MCAT Prep Hub. There's also resources that are available for purchase. There are 5 full practice exams, and there will be a new practice exam. It's going to be $35 for the individual practice exam on September 26th. So this is a brand new exam that will be available. There's also section and question banks, the CARS diagnostics, and more. A lot of people like to buy the full bundle because it is if you buy the full bundle, it is a slight discount versus buying individual pieces of the prep bundle, which you can do as well. So coming back to the content outline, there is a content outline for the MCAT. And if you go to that content outline, I have the link here. It essentially spells out all of the topics and sections that you are going to be tested on the exam. A lot of students don't know about the content outline, but it pretty much lays out in a very clear format the topics and sections that you're going to be tested on. So I think it's a good practice to have the content outline downloaded. You can print it out. It is quite long, but I think it's good practice to have it out because what you can do is as you're studying, you can go through the content outline, cross off sections and topics that you feel really comfortable with that you don't need to spend a lot of content review on, right? And instead identify themes that you may be a little bit less familiar with, that you find more difficult, right? The content outline is a really good way to stay organized in your MCAT studying, especially if you are choosing to self-study. A lot of the third-party courses like Blueprint and Kaplan and Princeton Review are based on the structure of the content outline. So if you're not doing a course like that and you're studying on your own, it is a very good idea to print it out or download it to keep track of the topics and subjects that you are putting your time into for the exam. So when you are working your way through the content outline as you are studying, you're going to be crossing off items, crossing off foundational concepts, crossing off skills as you start to understand them. Again, this is a really good way to stay organized while you are studying. So, like I just mentioned, the first thing that I recommend all of you do, especially if this is your first time taking the exam, is to start with some sort of practice exam. So for some people, they're going to feel more comfortable taking a practice section. So some people, they're going to feel more comfortable sitting for the full 7.5-hour exam. But the bottom line is that once you do the practice assessment, you want to analyze it immediately. Try not to wait until the next day if you can help it. And some of the third-party resources, they will do that analysis for you, or you can do it by hand. So like I mentioned, there is a free practice exam, there's a section bank, and there are question packs. All of these are resources for you to basically start that practice assessment before you delve into all of the content review and studying. So again, I want to make this point very clear. The most beneficial thing that you can do for the MCAT is to take practice assessments, right? You're going to do that from the beginning of your studying all the way down to maybe 3 weeks before your exam. That is the most beneficial thing that you can do when studying for the MCAT. And then eventually, as you get closer and closer to your exam, closer and closer to your exam date, you're going to start doing those under game day conditions, which we'll talk about later. And then, of course, do not forget to analyze your results as soon as possible. And again, this isn't just me saying this from the trainees that I have worked with. This is like a true battle tested technique from all the major testing companies that recommend the primary way to improve your score on the MCAT is to do ample amount of practice assessments in combination with content review for the entire length of your study time. So now let's move on to talking about some free and low cost resources that you can use to help prepare you for the exam. So again, I've already mentioned this previously, but the AAMC materials, the question packs, the section banks, the entire MCAT prep bundle, these are the closest to what you are going to find on the real exam. And again, in total, there are 7 practice exams for the MCAT offered by the AAMC. 5 are paid, 2 are free, and there will be 1 new, completely new one this year. And I do recommend trying to take all 7 of those exams from the AAMC. There are also a number of print materials, Kaplan, Princeton Review. Exam Crackers is one of my favorite MCAT resources because it's fairly affordable compared to some of the other testing companies. It's Exam Crackers with a K. Online, there are a number of different resources to Khan Academy, you know, an oldie but a goodie. I love Khan Academy. UWorld is very popular. It's kind of like a question bank, but they also do have content review materials as well through UWorld. Blueprint is also another very popular third-party service, and so are the Anki flash decks. Again, a very popular third-party service that you can use. And then Jack Weston is a really good resource, especially for cars. Other resources are things like study groups, and I'll talk about study groups a little bit later. So where do you look for these things, especially if you're trying to keep it free or very low cost? Your local library, if you are still in contact with your university or your home institution, those libraries. We do have some of these resources in the OITE library. I will say a lot of my materials have already been checked out, but I'd still have some left. So if you do need some MCAT materials, please contact me first, and I'll do my best to make sure that you can have something that's useful for you in the OITE library. But also check out your training office and the postbac listserv. Typically on the postbac listserv, people will like sell their previous MCAT materials for either very cheap once they're done, or just give them away outright. So again, use these resources to keep it as low cost as you can. So now that I've talked about some of the really common study materials for the MCAT, again, some of you have probably heard majority of the resources that I've mentioned. Some of you have not. There is this concept in the MCAT pre-med world on saving study materials for certain times throughout your studying for the MCAT. Right. It is very common for me to hear that when I'm working with a trainee who's preparing for the MCAT, that they've been told to save the AAMC materials for the final month before the exam, or to save UWorld to the very end of their studying, right? This is not effective for everyone, especially when it comes to the AAMC materials. The more often you expose yourself to a variety of different materials, the more useful they're going to be. So for the majority of people, we do recommend starting off with third-party materials like Blueprint and Kaplan and Princeton Review. But please do not wait until the last 2 to 4 weeks before your exam to start incorporating the AAMC materials. Again, this is very common advice, and this does not work for everyone. What I recommend instead is that through your entire time of studying, right? If you're going to study for 4 months, you want to be utilizing the AAMC materials and third-party resources throughout the entire time for your exam. So you can start gradually incorporating those AMC materials in throughout your studying rather than leaving them to 2 weeks before the exam. Because again, I'll say it again, they are the most similar to the real MCAT, and the earlier you see them, the better. So when we think about creating a study plan, again, the first thing that we want to do is assess your knowledge. Hopefully, I have made that point so far in this presentation, is that there is really no point in delving into all of this content review, all of these flashcards and other resources if you do not understand or have a good grasp of where you are starting. So that really needs to come first. So again, this is going to be time sections, half-length exams, for some people, full-length exams to assess where you are, right? And then eventually you're going to move on to doing, as you continue to study and get more comfortable with the exam, you're going to move on to doing timed practice assessments. And you're going to write down on a piece of scratch paper, do you feel rushed? Do you feel more rushed in biochem than you do in psych-soc? Do you feel more stressed when you're working through your CARS passages, right? Do you feel tired by the end of your exam? Are you incorporating many mental breaks? All of these things are going to be ways for you to assess how you're actually navigating yourself through the exams, and then identifying areas that you can improve on as you get closer and closer to your exam day. So for example, if you really feel rushed through your CARS sections, right, that means you probably need to work on your reading speed at some level at some point, right? So make sure you're taking notes of this as you're assessing your knowledge throughout the time that you're studying. And then if we go back to that, kind of diagram I had in my previous slide that kind of looked like a circle, after you assess your knowledge and see where you stand, or take it a practice exam or sections to see where you stand, then you need to think about how are you going to analyze your data. Again, a lot of the third-party services are going to do this for you, but I also think it's a good idea to start doing this by hand, especially if you are using the content outline to guide your studying. There's a couple of different ways you can analyze your results that I recommend. My personal favorite is to do it by content category, but you can also do this by scientific inquiry and reasoning skill, by question type, or by looking at your wrong answers. So again, just for me personally, my favorite way to analyze your results is to do this by using the content categories. Again, these content categories you can find in the content outline. So for example, content category foundational concept 1A, I know this one by heart, is the structure and functions of proteins and their constituent amino acids, right? So let's say you're doing a practice section for biochem, right? And you analyze your results and you categorize those questions into those foundational concepts. And you're looking at questions that fall into foundational concept 1A, structure and functions of protein and amino acids. And you find that you are doing really well on questions related to structure and function of amino acids, but maybe content category 4B, I'm just going to make this up, but bioenergetics and glycolysis, you're not doing as well on, right? Maybe you're getting 4 out of 5 of those questions wrong, right? So that means when it comes to your content review, you need to be spending your time studying bioenergetics and glycolysis, not necessarily the structure and functions of proteins and their constituent amino acids, right? So again, this is just one way to analyze your results, and many of the third-party services are going to do this for you by automatically, but it's also nice if you're able to identify this by hand as well. Another way to analyze your results is by using the different scientific inquiries and reasoning skills. Again, there are several of these and they are in the content outline. You can look at the questions in a particular assessment, a particular section, and then assign it to each one of these categories. And again, same thing, figure out whether or not you are getting questions that are related to the knowledge of scientific principles. You're getting the majority of those right. And maybe you're getting the majority of questions wrong that are related to data-based and statistical reasoning, right? So these are all ways that you can assess your results. And that way you can spend the majority of your time studying the skills or the foundational concepts that you need the most improvement on. You can also do this by question type. There are lots of different question types on the MCAT, and some people do better on certain types than the other. So for example, those kind of freestanding discrete questions, maybe you do really well on those, right? You're getting 50% or more of those questions right. But maybe it's the questions that, have the nomen numerals that I know everybody loves. Maybe you're struggling a bit more on question types like that. Again, it's another way to assess how you assess and analyze how you are doing on your practice assessments. So again, multiple different ways that you can go about assessing your results. You can also assess results about, why you got a particular question right or wrong. You can identify whether the details of the questions, the concepts of the questions, did you misread it? Did you overthink it? Did you change your answer, which is very, very common. This still holds true that usually the first answer you put is the most likely one to be correct, right? But you can also analyze your results on why did you get a particular question wrong. So how would you do that? So you look at a question that you got wrong, you reread the question again, and you note that I misunderstood a detail in that question, right? So what do you do to correct that? You slow down when reading the question. So this is another way, again, to analyze your results. Or maybe you guessed because you didn't understand the details at all. So what do you do to correct that? You go back to the content categories related to that question and start studying that content again, right? So again, another way to assess what you got right or why you got a particular question wrong. Here's some other options for that wrong answer assessment. This is a very common one, especially if you are feeling rushed during your exam, right? You misread the answer choices because you're rushing, right? So that means you just need to slow down when reading the answers as a correction. So again, another way to analyze your results. So that's by content category, my personal favorite, by skill, by question type, or by wrong answer. And for some people, you want to use a combination of all of these different methods to analyze your results. So now that you have taken a practice assessment, like again, hopefully I've convinced you all to do, analyzed your results, again, ideally on the same day if you can, what do you do next, right? You're going to finally start studying, start doing your content review, pull out your Kaplan or Princeton review or UWorld books, and you're going to start on the study areas that you're doing the most poorly on, or you feel like you need the most improvement. Now, I know this is kind of contradictory to a lot of our instincts, but this is really the most effective way to study, is to start with the topics you dislike the most or the topics you feel like you need the most improvement on for your content review. So how much time do you need to study, right? So the AMC recommends in total about 300 to 350 hours of preparation in order to do well on the exam. I've broken that down to what it looks like, whether you're starting 3 months, 4 months, or 6 months before the exam. And again, like I said in the very beginning of the presentation, you want to think about this as a part-time job. My recommendation for most NIH postbacks is going to be about 4 months of studying, which is going to break down to about 20 hours per week. So if you think of a typical week where you're in lab from 8 to 5, and then you study for maybe 3 to 4 hours a day, and then more on the weekend, you're easily going to make it to those 20 hours per week, which is our recommendation. So again, view this as a part-time job, create a weekly study schedule. I will talk about that in a little bit. Literally plan out hour by hour when you're going to be studying. Make sure that you're checking in with yourself, tracking how much time that you're studying, tracking what you're actually doing when you're studying, I think is very important. And for some people, it's nice to find an accountability partner. This could be another postback in your lab. This could be your sister or your brother, your mom, whoever you need it to be, to find an accountability partner who you're going to report your progress to, kind of like a supervisor almost, right? Again, thinking about this like a part-time job, as you're studying for this exam. So when we think about, again, our recommendation is about 4 months before you sit for the exam. So for those of you who want to take the MCAT in January, hopefully you've already taken a practice assessment and begun studying, because that gives you September, October, November, and December, and then you take it in January, is what we recommend. This is commonly what I see sometimes for a plan for studying for the MCAT, right? You're going to do in your first month a topic that you really like, maybe psych-soc for some of you. And then you're going to wait to do the topics that you feel like you don't like as much or need the most improvement with much closer to the exam. The final month before the exam, you're going to do a bunch of practice tests, and then you're going to take the exam. So this is a pretty standard study plan that I see from a decent number of students, but there are some problems with this type of plan. First of all, where's the CARS preparation? Remember, CARS can be one of the most difficult sections to improve on, and it is the most different from all the other sections of the exam. This person pushed their hardest, least liked subject to the end instead of starting with it. And by the time you make it to your practice exams, it's been 3 months since you've actually seen any psych-soc material. And in this type of plan, the student has not made time to do practice assessments, which again, I said it earlier, is the single most important thing you can do for the MCAT, is to do ample practice assessments. So what does a better 4-month plan actually look like, right? So this is what I recommend in terms of, a 4 or 5 or 6 month plan, whatever it is you decide to do in terms of the length and amount of time you're studying. So again, you're going to start with some type of practice assessment. Here I have a practice test, and then you're going to assess your results. And then from there, you're going to structure your content review around the sections that you need the most improvement in. So for example, this student, maybe English is not their first language. So they need to spend a lot more time studying CARS. Maybe they didn't ever took a psychology or sociology class in undergrad. So they really need time to learn all of those all of those terminologies that you need to do really well for psych-soc. But they did really well in bio and biochem. Notice the bubbles are not totally gone, right? They're still studying all 4 sections of the exam, but it's about the proportion of time that they're giving to each individual section of the exam is dictated by their practice assessments, not the other way around. So I hope that makes sense. And as we get closer and closer to the test date, right, ideally, as you do more content review, the amount of time that you are spending on each section starts to become more similar. And then the amount of time you spend doing practice assessments starts to increase, right, as you get closer and closer to the exam. But again, notice even by month 3, we have still not completely eliminated our content review. We're still primarily doing practice tests in this month, but maybe we're spending a less proportion of our time doing content review. And then by the month before your exam, you're almost exclusively doing practice assessments and practice tests. But again, you're not totally removing the content review. You're just only studying the material that you are primarily getting wrong. So in this system, compared to our other ones, the entire time we're doing practice assessments and practice exams rather than just leaving all of it towards the end. It's just about the proportion of the amount of time that you're giving to doing practice assessments versus content review. So when we think about creating a schedule, which I'll go over here in a minute, you have to think about what times work for you. Are you the type of person that's able to study for 5 hours on a Saturday, or do you need to break it up over time, right? You need to schedule your practice exams. We recommend anywhere between 7 to 10. And after you do your first practice assessment and then you do some content review, we recommend about 4 to 6 weeks of content review. Then you're going to go ahead and sit for your next practice exam. And like I said, about 4 months in advance is a good place to start at in terms of studying for the majority of examinees. Plan to be done studying your content review about 3 weeks before your exam. So again, when it comes to actually creating a schedule, I think it's important to mix up the materials that you're doing or the sections that you're studying every week. So that way there's not a single week where you're only doing cars or you're only doing psych shows, right? You're mixing up materials to keep the content in your mind really fresh, right? And for some people, you even want to tackle more than one subject in one day. We'll talk about paced and repeated review a little bit later, but I do think it's important to schedule a break day every day. That is incredibly important to take at least a break day or if not a break afternoon at minimum into your studying schedule. And then again, aim between 1.5 to 3 to 4 hours a day, depending on the total amount of months you plan on studying. So this is what a potential study schedule could look like for someone getting ready for the MCAT that's also working full-time at the NIH. So I got this from a real student several years ago of what their plan actually looked like. So here on Sunday, we can see that Sunday they're going to study for a much longer amount of time, for a full 5 hours. They're going to do one block in the morning and one block in the afternoon. And they literally have it planned out exactly what they plan on doing. They're going to practice with some Anki flashcards. They're going to watch some Khan Academy videos on Sunday. Then throughout the week when they're at work, right, they literally hour by hour plan out what they're planning on doing. So this person, they were an early bird like me. They like to study in the morning. So they studied for 3 hours in the morning and then went to lab. And again, day by day, they planned out exactly what they were going to do. They incorporated some time to go to the gym, eat lunch, all of those things. So I think it's a really good idea to have some type of schedule like this, where you plan it out hour by hour and you plan out exactly what you're going to do on that day. Also notice this student incorporated time to study, right? And time to do practice assessments every week. There was not a single week where this student only did content review or only did practice assessments. They kept it, they did a mixture of it through the entire time they were studying. This is another version of what this could look like for those of you who may want to break it up throughout the day, right? I know some people like to do that, but if you do plan on studying in lab, right, during your lab hours, that is something that you want to make sure you talk to your PIs and supervisors about before you pull out your Anki flashcards or your Kaplan books, if you choose to do a model like this where you're kind of breaking it up throughout the day. So you can do it week by week. A lot of people also like to do this on a monthly basis. Again, I got this from a real student last year, and we can see there was not a single week where they were only doing one section of the exam, or they were only doing practice assessments or only content review. And we could see here that they incorporate it in their break days like I recommended. So whether you do it on a monthly basis or a weekly basis, that's your choice. But I do think it's important to have some sort of schedule set up like this. And of course, it's very, very, very important to track your progress. Keep a file, right, to compare your performance. Do this in Google Sheets or Excel or whatever your preferred platform is. Make sure you're taking those full-length practice exams like we mentioned. So you're going to start with some type of start with some type of assessment, and then maybe about 4 to 6 weeks later, you're going to sit for your next practice exam. And then a lot of students like to do every 2 to 3 weeks with practice exams after that, right? So I think that's a good way to kind of get yourself organized. Make sure you're using the AAMC test, and again, tracking your performance. And again, take time to analyze your results, and then maybe you schedule 30 to 40 minutes every week to update that performance file, right? So you can keep track of, again, what sections and concepts are you doing really well on versus the things that you need to improve. Okay. And what also this allows for is for you to see gaps in knowledge and if your score is plateauing. So having a score plateau is very, very common. I hear that all the time. Brittany, my score has not gone up in the last 4 weeks, right? So having this type of data allows you to figure out why your score is not improving, right? So if you're not seeing a change in your performance, right, based on your data, your analysis, that means you need to change how you're studying. Maybe the Kaplan books aren't really working for you and you want to switch to using the blueprint study materials, right? Maybe the Anki flashcards aren't working for you and you need to start writing them yourself by hand. So the only way you're going to know that is by having this type of data on hand. Again, many of the major testing companies are going to do this for you if you're taking a course, but if you're self-studying, you're going to have to get used to doing this by hand. Okay, so I'm going to break here and just check to see, are there any questions or comments or anything, Natasha?
No, there's nothing right now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to keep going so we could stay on time. All right. So now step 5, right? We talked about finding out everything that you can know about the exam, registration, figuring out where you stand, and how to come up with a general study plan. Notice I did not talk about how specifically to structure your studying based on each individual section, because that is going to be really unique to each one of you, right? So I know online there are all sorts of MCAT study guides that you can use, and I think those are a good place to start. But remember, those were made for that specific person. Your study plan may look different. And again, the only way you're going to know that is if you sit for some sort of practice assessment throughout your studying, right? So you can utilize those pre-made study plans, but make sure you customize them to the areas that you're doing really well in versus the areas you need to improve. So when we think about a study plan, you need to absolutely include these 3 tasks. So content review, we've already talked about, but think about content review in combination with a specific learning goal. Retrieval practice, which are going to be your practice sections, your practice questions, and spaced repetition, usually through flashcards. And then, of course, practice exams. And then again, I like this little bubble. I like these little bubble type diagrams. So again, here on the x-axis, I have times towards the exam. And then up here, each bubble represents the amount of time you're spending on each one of these 3 tasks. So in the beginning, you're going to be doing the majority of time, it's going to be spent on practice questions and content review, but you're still going to be doing the practice exam. And as you get closer and closer to your exam date, the amount of content review is going to shrink and the amount of practice questions and practice exams is going to expand greatly. So I got this from the AAMC website of how to literally structure one of your study sections. So again, this point, we've already started off. We already kind of know where we stand with our content review. So let's say this is for a topic that we need some improvement with. You're going to briefly start off by reviewing that topic area. So maybe you'll read the corresponding chapter in a Kaplan book, right? Then you're going to complete a short set of questions related to that content area. Again, maybe the questions at the end of the Kaplan chapter, right? You're going to analyze your results and figure out why you got a question right or wrong. And then you're going to review the concepts and facts for that particular topic area that you need the most improvement on. Then for there, you're going to summarize those results in some way, like I've talked about assessing your results. And then you're going to move back on to practice questions and repeat the cycle over and over and over again. So essentially, this breaks down to brief review, practice questions, analyzing your results, summarizing that analysis in some way, and then continuing that process over and over and over again when you're structuring your study section, your study sessions. So this particular method really plays well with shorter, more intense study sessions rather than, really long drawn out blocks. And this is because there's a lot of data that has shown that shorter, more intense study sessions where you're using a cycle like this is much more effective than just, reading an entire book from back to front and then doing a bunch of questions afterwards, right? So this allows you not to waste your effort when you're not being effective. So for some people, you want to even think about maybe putting on a timer, right? Timing how long that you're spending on that review, that content review for a section that we talked about, and then you move on to practice questions, right? You may even want to time it to keep yourself on track. So 30 to 45 minutes of active studying is far better than 3 hours where you're kind of just passively, going through your Kaplan books, right? That is far more effective. And again, these shorter intense study sections play really well with that diagram that I just showed. So with the timing, a lot of people like the Pomodoro method. I use this personally. I have an app on my iPad that I use all the time to structure when I'm doing some type of work. So a lot of people like the Pomodoro method, where you do 25 minutes of work, then you take a 5-minute breaks and you repeat that cycle. Also really important when you are studying to eliminate distractions, multitasking. I love YouTube shorts and TikTok and all of those things just as much as the next person, but they really can be distracting. So put your phone on Do Not Disturb, or even put it in another room if you have to while you are studying so you don't hear those notifications. If you're studying with a friend, really make sure, or a study partner, really make sure that you're you're paying attention to whether or not that study partner is serving as an asset or a distraction, right? That's something that you really want to make sure you're taking note of if you are studying with an additional person. So try to keep the distractions at a minimum when you're studying for the exam. And this is one of the reasons why it can be more challenging to study while you're in lab, because there are a lot of distractions while you are in lab, right? Someone may need you to go block a Western blot for them while you're in the middle of studying. So just keep all those things in mind if you do choose to study in lab, after talking to your supervisor or your PI, of course. So we've talked about, kind of how, to structure your studying, but now let's talk about actual study strategies, including study groups, concept mapping, teaching others, and a couple of these other really important study strategies that you want to try to incorporate into studying for the MCAT. Now, the first is study groups. Study groups are really popular, especially, if you were still at your home institution studying. These are really popular, and I do know that there are generally several post-bac study groups for the MCAT going on. I think they're organized on like GroupMe or something like that. But yeah, so study groups are one way, you could think about studying, because they're a good time to really understand that if you can't explain a particular topic to your study group member, then that probably means you need to review it. Study groups are also really good for sharing resources, accountability. I talked about earlier having accountability partner, right? Book clubs for cars, all of those good things are some real pros about studying groups. But like I mentioned, they're not for everyone. They can be distracting, like I just mentioned on the previous slide. So if you do choose to join a study group, make sure it's helping and not hurting you. Another study strategy that I really like and I've seen postbacks be successful with over the years is using something called a concept map. So a lot of people do like those traditional kind of books, Kaplan and Princeton review for the majority of your content review, and that's fine. But another way to kind of use that or view that information in a different way is to use something called a concept map. So this is like a graphical representation or a visual representation that you make, right? That you're going to draw out or make by hand for a particular subject or content area. So what do these concept maps actually look like? So here I have a couple of different examples of ones that students have made over the years related to different concepts. So for this one, this is about the biology of the different macromolecules, lipids, nucleic acids, proteins, and carbohydrates. This is one example of a concept map. So maybe they've read a chapter in a Kaplan book related to macromolecules, and instead of just, memorizing the text in the Kaplan book, they decided to make a graphical representation of that. A lot of students find success kind of memorizing content in this way. Here we have an example for genetics, right? For learning about the differences between phenotype and genotype, segregation, codominance, terms that are really important to genetics. Here's a much more fancy concept map that they drew out embryoneogenesis, right, in order for them to learn the individual steps of the process. So all of these were maybe things that they had read in one of their other more traditional print mediums, but then they drew it out on their own. And this really helps you retain the information. So think about using concept maps when you are doing your content review. Like I previously mentioned, the protege effect or teaching other, this is something that is really easy to facilitate if you're in a study group. But one really tried and true way to know if you understand a subject or a content is to teach it to someone else. Again, this is something that is really easy to facilitate in a study group. But if you don't have a study group, maybe you try to explain glycolysis to your grandpa, right? And if your grandpa can get it, that means, unless he just happens to be a biochemist, if your grandpa can understand it, right, that means you probably did a good job of explaining it. So use that teaching as a way to confirm your knowledge in a particular subject or concept area. Reading speed and comprehension. This is especially important for cars, which again, Dr. Siebel will talk more about cars in depth next week. But having a good reading speed, but not only just having good reading speed, but actually comprehending and retaining the material is really important. So using your hand as a guide, practicing speed drills, all of those things are really important for cars, but really all 4 sections of the exams. So this is just a little bit more about cars and assessing your results. Again, yes, you need to assess your results for cars as well. So you could break this down into questions that are just about comprehension of the passage, reasoning within the text. I know everybody loves these type of questions, reasoning beyond the text, right? So you can do your assessment for cars as well, similar to what I described previously. So again, Dr. Seabolt's going to talk about this more next week, but here are just some general things that you could think about when studying for cars is try to do multiple passages in the row, assess your results on the same day if you can, and make sure that you are reading, right? Just reading really dense non-scientific texts, right, that are typically found in the car section of the exam. So the New Yorker, the Economist, Harper's Bazaar, even some articles I've seen recently in like Wall Street Journal are really similar to what you will find in a car section. So just reading in general is really good for cars. In addition to maybe even looking at some LSAT. The LSAT is the entrance exam for law school. It's actually written by the same company as the MCAT. So maybe even looking at some LSAT questions as a way to continue to help prepare yourself for cars. So I mentioned it in the beginning that with your content review and all of the strategies we just talked about for content reviews, I think it's important not only to just do the content review, but actually set learning goals for yourself. So make sure that when you are setting out to study content, you have a learning goal in mind. So for example, if you're going to go back to the structure and function of proteins and their constituent amino acids, maybe by the end of studying that, you're able to separate. One of your goals is to be able to separate the amino acid side chains by hydrophobic versus hydrophilic, right? That's the goal for the end of that content review. Or you created a vocabulary list for psychos, and we know there's a lot of terminology you need for the psychos section. So again, do your content review, but make sure you actually have goals in mind that you're keeping a track of during each one of your content review sessions. So now moving on to retrieval practice, which is going to be a combination of spaced repetition and practice questions. Spaced repetition is, most people facilitate this through the use of flashcards. The Anki flashcards are really popular and based off of spaced repetition, but you don't want to do any sort of spaced repetition before you've done some level of content review first. So flashcards are a really good way of assessing your depth of knowledge as you study. So again, the Anki flashcards are really, really popular, and they can be an effective study tool, but it is going to vary a little bit from person to person. One thing that I can recommend against is only using flashcards as your primary method of studying. This can lead to feeling overconfident in your mastering of the knowledge. But what they are good for is on-the-go studying, and again, to supplement your content review. And then think about writing your own flashcards. Again, that active writing, and I'm sure the neuroscientists in the audience could tell me more about this than I'm about to tell you, but that act of writing literally activates your brain and helps you maintain material better. So think about writing your own flashcards as well. A really popular technique is when you do a practice section and then again, you analyze your results. A lot of examinees like to write flashcards on the concepts that they are getting wrong and then review them. So that's a very popular test taking technique, is to write flashcards on concepts that you are getting consistently wrong or need improvement in. And then, of course, again, outside of the content review and the retrieval practice with spaced repetition, you also want to be incorporating ample amount of time, especially as you get closer to your test date, practicing questions and practice sections, right? And making sure you're understanding why you got a question right or wrong, so you don't make that same mistake again. So I've talked a lot about practice questions and the importance of doing practice questions throughout the entire time you're studying. So the AAMC recommends in total between 3,000 to 4,000 practice questions. And this does not include any full length or half length exams that you do. Now, I know this sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but if you think about all the third-party resources that you're going to use, the AAMC materials that you're going to do, if you read a chapter in Kaplan, it comes with questions at the end. Those count towards this 3,000 to 4,000 question goal. You're easily going to rack up this number of questions, including your flashcards, over 4 months of studying, right? So I actually have that broken down here per day. Again, don't panic. I know it looks like a lot, but this kind of breaks down to somewhere around about 28 questions per day. And again, this includes your flashcards, the questions at the end of the Princeton Review, UWorld, AMC, all of that's included. So when you're thinking about these 3,000 to 4,000 practice questions, use 60% as a benchmark, right? So let's say you do 28 questions this upcoming Tuesday related to gel electrophoresis, right? You do 28 questions related to that. If you're getting 60% or more of those questions right, that's a pretty good indicator that you have a good handle on that content. But if you're getting less than 60% right, that's a good indicator that you need to go back and do more content review related to those questions. So use 60%, 60, 65% as a benchmark of, hey, I have a really good handle on this content. I can probably move on to something else when you're doing your practice questions throughout your studying. So again, another example of what some daily studying can look like from the AAMC. So you start off by, again, like I said in the very beginning, start off with those sections that you feel the least confident about, that you dislike the most, that you need the most improvement with. You're going to use some of the study strategies we talked about for content review, spaced repetition, concept mapping, all of those good things. And then you're going to move on to your practice sections and questions, again, using 60% as a benchmark. And then you're going to move on to spaced repetition to continue to supplement that content review, especially on the concepts that you are getting wrong. And again, you're going to just keep repeating this cycle over and over and over again. So just to summarize everything, mix up your content review, make sure you have learning goals, make sure you're doing ample retrieval practice, 3,000 to 4,000 questions total, and you're doing spaced repetition throughout your time studying. So the last thing that we're going to talk about today is doing full-length exams. How many you should do. Again, I think I said this previously. Ideally, about 7 to 10 total is a good place to be at. The AMC will have 7 that on their website. 2 will be free, and then there'll be a brand new one available on September 26th. So you want to do about 7 to 10 total. And there are all sorts of third-party resources that you can do for free exams. There are a couple of testing companies where you can buy exam packs for fairly affordable, like Altius is one of them. So make sure you're doing ample amount of practice exams, 7 to 10 total. And then again, when should you start doing this? You're going to start off with some sort of practice assessment, maybe do 4 to 6 weeks of content review, but you're also doing spaced repetition and practice questions. And then after 4 to 6 weeks, you'll sit for your next full-length exam. So you can actually buy something similar to the MCAT testing notebook. If you just go to Amazon and search this, there are all sorts of similar notebooks that you can buy that are going to be really similar to what you're going to have on the real MCAT. And you can practice with this. So again, just search this on like Amazon or your preferred shopping platform to see if that they have similar booklets that you can practice with. So again, some general, again, now test taking strategies, which again is avoiding distractions. So if there's extra information in the passage or in the question that you don't need, that's going to slow down your reading speed, you want to avoid it. Try to anticipate the answer. This is, again, a really popular test taking technique where you maybe cover up the answer with your hand, or you don't look at the answer choices. You come up with with the answer in your head first, and then you look at the choices and pick the one that matches the most close. Pay attention to qualifiers in those answer choices. Never, always, most, every. Those are usually indications that that answer choice is wrong. And then there's nothing wrong with the good old process of elimination when you are working your way through different answer choices. Another really popular test taking technique is basically ranking passages, skipping questions versus taking them as they come. So this does take a little bit of practice, but if you're able to, look at all the passages in your section first and then rank them from easiest to hardest, again, you do not get more points for answering the harder questions first. This is one test taking technique that can be really effective, but this only is effective if you don't take a lot of time to do this. So if you are planning on ranking your passages, especially for cars, this is something that's going to take a lot of practice to get well at if you do choose to do this. So hopefully, again, I have convinced everyone that to get started, make sure you are doing some sort of practice assessment, and that you do not put off taking practice exams and practice tests to the very end. Schedule your next full-length practice exam right after this presentation today, right? Put it on your calendar. Tell your friend or a member of your support system when you're planning on taking this to hold yourself accountable. So now moving on to kind of preparing for test day, right? So we've done everything that we can. We've done our content review with our learning goals. We've done our practice questions and sections, and we've done ample number of practice exams, right? So how do you actually prepare for the actual test day? Again, like I've said previously, as you get closer and closer to the test day, the amount of content review you should do should start going down, and the number of practice assessments and practice tests should start going up. So by the time you're about 3 to 4 weeks away from your exam date, ideally you are done with your content review. And at this point, you are doing practice exams. So there are a couple of places on campus that I recommend doing practice exams, timed practice exams, as you get closer and closer to your test date. So on campus, if you're planning on doing practice exam on campus, I recommend the lobby of Building 35. If you've ever been in that building, there's a big lobby in the bottom of the building where people are walking and talking, and there's distractions around. It's much more similar to the real MCAT testing environment than sitting alone in your room and doing it. So you may want to do it there. If you want a real challenge, right, where there are a ton of questions around or a ton of distractions around as you get closer and closer to your exam date, go to the atrium of Building 10, where there are a ton of distractions around, right? Or you could also think about going to your public library. You want to make sure that you're eating and sleeping well throughout your entire time studying. This is really important for memory consolidation and, making sure you stay sharp with the content review and exams that you're doing. Additional thoughts when it comes to getting ready for test day. Again, make sure you have some sort of notepad that's similar to what you're going to have on the exam. Guessing is not penalizing. Guessing is not penalized. Make sure you're keeping up your pace, and make sure you're checking in with yourself, your mindfulness, checking in with your support network, and taking those break days like I talked about earlier. And then, of course, you're actually going to go ahead and sit for your practice exams, which for some people can be the hardest part. But again, as you get closer to the exam date, you want to start doing your test under game day conditions. Again, somewhere like the lobby of Building 35, which the environment is much more similar to what you're going to find on the MCAT in a testing center rather than in your room. As you get closer, you want to start doing these game day dress rehearsals for your practice exams. So this includes you're still doing a little bit of studying. Maybe you're doing short memory tasks at this time, using your flashcards, just keeping up with specific equations or chemical reactions. You're doing your finals cars practice. You're still doing, practice sections and practice exams. But at this point, right, when we're this close to the exam, please resist the urge to disrupt your entire life for this exam, right? Still try to do the things that make you happy and you can have fun. And also make sure you're keeping note of the behavior of those around you, especially if you're in a study group. If other people are starting to panic, that can make you feel like, well, why am I not panicking? Make sure you're keeping note of the behavior of the people around you. So, of course, this is something that, we hear occasionally is, do I recommend that you take off the week from the MCAT and study the whole 40 hours every day or throughout that week? Of course, we do not recommend this. Hopefully, again, I've convinced everyone that studying for the MCAT is a marathon, not a sprint. And taking a bunch of time, a week or two before your exam, to do all of your final studying is just not an effective strategy. It's not effective in terms of actually studying, and it's definitely not effective in terms for your well-being. The final week before your exam, you're going to try your best to resume your life as normal. You still may be doing a little bit of studying here and there, primarily through flashcards, maybe some practice questions or practice sections. And you're going to try to establish a routine. Sleeping, getting good sleep, not staying up too late, still doing some level of exercise, eating well, and doing things that you genuinely love. Reading, going to the movies, hanging out with your friends. Low stake activities that you really love. And before the test date, the day before the test date, right? This is not the time to try anything new. No new food, no new clothes, right? You're going to have your outfit picked out. You're going to have the snacks that you plan on taking with you. You've already tried them and liked them, and you're going to take them with you, right? So this is not the time for anything new, right? You're going to remind yourself that you've been studying for 4 to 5 months. You feel good, and you're going to go ahead and take the exam. And then I typically recommend not doing a practice test the week of the exam. It just brings about additional stress. Like a full 7-hour practice exams, it brings about additional stress. Now, some practice questions or a practice section here or there, sure, but avoid doing a full practice exam the final week for your exam. The day before, right? You're going to do whatever makes you happy. Again, watch what you eat. Be careful with your medications if that's something you have to do. Make sure you're not going to bed too early or too late. And even go to the testing location and check out where it is, right? Because the last thing you want to be worried about on your test day is, I don't even know where my testing location is, or do I have to pay for parking at my testing location? Figure those logistical things out about 2 to 3 days before your exam. What line on the metro is my testing center the closest to, right? Figure out where that is before the day of the exam. So the day of your exam, ideally try to wake up 2 hours early. You're going to dress, right, for success with layers. I do want to say something about layers. This is a brand new policy that the AAMC put out for this testing year. A lot of students do like to dress in layers for their exams. However, if you want to take a layer off, like you want to remove your sweatshirt, you have to now completely leave your cubicle in order to do that. So you can do that during one of your optional breaks, but if you are doing it not during an optional break and you want to go take off your sweatshirt, the time doesn't stop on your exam, right? So that is a brand new policy for particularly dressing in layers that the AAMC put out, okay? So if you feel like you must study up until your test day, maybe you have just a few of your flashcards with you and you're, just reviewing them as you get closer to the testing location. right? Again, as you're doing this, manage your expectations versus your goals as you're in the final couple days to hours of studying. Make sure you're managing your expectations and your goals, and be kind to yourself as you get closer and closer to your test date, right? Utilize your support network as much as possible, whether that's your support network here at NIH or your support network back at home or your home institution. Make sure you're utilizing your support network. And then, yes, we at OITE, we are 100% a part of your support network. And we have a number of different well-being resources that I strongly recommend that you use if you feel like you need additional support. So, to summarize everything that we have talked about here today, find out everything that you can about the MCAT before registration, right? Which again begins on October 21st at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Start off your studying with some sort of practice assessment. This could be an exam, this could be sections or questions, whatever you're comfortable with. But before you delve into your content review, you have to know where you start. And the only way you're going to know that is through a practice assessment. Then you start your content review, starting with sections that you are most unfamiliar or need the most improvement with. After about 4 to 6 weeks of studying with the various strategies that we've talked about, then you're going to sit for another practice exam, right? And as you get closer and closer to your exam date, you're going to choose a location that's not completely silent when you're doing your practice assessments. Continue to study and continue those cycles that we talked about where you're doing content review, assessing your results, practice questions, spaced repetition over and over and over again as you study. So that is going to end our presentation today. I thank you all so much for coming. So we do have another Q&A session this Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Myself and Dr. Hill will be there. I have the link to register for that Q&A session if you are interested in it. I also have this link for just additional resources for pre-medical students that we have available on our website. And if you haven't met with a pre-med advisor, that's going to be myself, my colleague, Dr. John Taborn, or Dr. Natasha Hill, please make an appointment with one of us, especially if you are new to the NIH or if you've never had pre-med advising before. Please meet with one of us before you start this process of studying for the MCAT and getting ready to apply to medical school. So that is the end of my presentation today. Just very quickly, are there any questions that we need to address?
There's one question in the chat, and it says, does this apply to only hoodies, referring to the removal of jackets?
Mm-hmm.
Only hoodies, or is the same rule applied for cardigans and zip-up jackets?
It applies to all layers. They made that very clear in the webinar for advisors that if you are taking off something, you need to do it during an optional break. Or if you do not do it during an optional break, you have to get up and leave, and the timer on your exam is not going to stop. So again, that should be in the MCAT Essentials, the updated MCAT Essentials, to see those specific policies. But it's a brand new one from the AAMC. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you all so much for coming. Again, if you're registered, you will get the slides and the recording. You will need your NIH credentials to be able to access the recording, and we will try to send that out within the next 48 hours. So give me a little bit of time to get that organized, and you will get all the slides in the recording within the next 48 hours. So thank you so much for everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll see y'all at the Q&A on Friday. Bye, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye, everyone.